Hey y'all, my name is David Rest. I am an instructional designer at Jamf, and welcome to an introduction to the Jamf Pro Classic API. Happy to have you here. Hope you learn a thing or two. Let's go ahead and get on into it. So we're really going to have three little sections in this session. First thing, we're going to talk about what is an API, right? This is an introduction, no assumed knowledge, what is an API? Then we're going to talk about what can we do with the Jamf Pro Classic API. And finally, we're going to walk you through two examples of how we can actually use the Jamf Pro Classic API. So for all of my Sound of Music fans out there, let's start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. And the first question we want to ask is, what is an API? API simply stands for Application Programming Interface. Simply, it's a thing that allows for communication between two systems. For example, my computer and a Jamf Pro server. Another way that I've heard it explained is you could think, for example, like a server in a restaurant might be like an API, right? That allows for communication between a diner and the kitchen. So again, an application programming interface simply allows for communication between two systems. Now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about Jamf Pro APIs. And really, there are two Jamf Pro APIs, the Classic API and the Jamf Pro API. In this session, we are going to talk about the Jamf Pro Classic API. Now, there are some built-in documentation, or we have some documentation, right, about the APIs. The easiest way to get there is to go to your Jamf Pro server URL/API. You can also go to developer.jamf.com/jamf-pro to find more information about both APIs. Having said that, let's talk about what we can actually do with the Classic API. So a couple of examples, right? We can view and modify device inventory data, right? We can send remote commands. We can also create, update, and delete Jamf Pro objects, right? So we can do a lot of things with the Classic API. But I hear some of you saying, David, right, we have this really awesome graphic user interface, right? Jamf Pro is beautiful. It's so functional. It's awesome. Why would we do things like use the API in the command line, right, when we have this beautiful GUI? And the answer to that is really just one word, real clear. It is automation, right? So again, you can do things inside of Jamf Pro. You can use the API in a command line, right? But let me give you a couple of scenarios when you might consider using the API. So for example, right, if you are using the building objects to organize your Jamf Pro server, maybe you need to update the address for 100 buildings, right? You can go into the settings, buildings, edit, update the address, save. Cool, right? One at a time. But if you've got more than a couple to do, you might want to automate that process, right? Same thing, maybe we're going to change our asset tag system, right? And we need to update the asset tag for 75,000 devices. Or we need to create 1,000 sites, right? These are all things that can be done one at a time. But if you want to automate this process, the APIs can help make your life a lot easier. So having said all that, let's talk about how we can actually use the Jamf Pro Classic API. Simply, these are all just commands that could be run in terminal, right? But in this session, I'm going to be using an app called CodeRunner. I love CodeRunner because it allows me to go ahead and see the command and the response body, make some edits if you screw up. Spoiler alert, I screw up all the time. Luckily, this is all pre-recorded, so everything's going to work. But learning to use the API and write scripts in general is kind of like riding a bike. You're probably going to fall off and scrape your knee. That's okay. It's part of the process. So again, in this session, we're going to be using an app called CodeRunner. Cool. So we're going to look at a couple of different workflows. The first thing we're going to do is how we can actually view or use the Jamf Pro Classic API to view a device's inventory information. And then we're going to send a remote command to that device using the Classic API. So we're going to start, again, we're doing this on a Mac, right, in the terminal app or then in CodeRunner. So we're going to start with a binary called curl. So again, all of our API calls that we're going to run today, both of them, are going to use a binary called curl. Now, one of the neat things about macOS in general and terminal is that a lot of built-in binaries have a documentation page or a manual page built in. So if you were to open a terminal window and type in man space curl, right, man as in manual, you will see something that looks like this, right? So we can see here that curl is going to transfer a URL, right? Now, as we can see in that second paragraph, it does offer a busload of useful tricks. In this case, we don't need any of those useful tricks, right? We're just going to use the curl binary to transfer, right, a URL. Now, as we start writing these commands, and again, it's basically going to be a script, right? It sounds scary, don't worry. One true best practice, however, when we start writing commands or scripts is to use the full path to said binary. So in this case, we can also then, for example, open another terminal window and type in which space curl, right? And we'll see here the full path to the binary. So my goal here is not only use curl, but also use the full path to the binary. We don't want to assume its location. So gotten all that out of the way, let's talk about how we can actually view a device's inventory information using the Jamf Pro Classic API. If we go to our URL/API, you'll see a page that looks like this, right? We have documentation for the Classic API and for the Jamf Pro API. We're going to view the Classic API documentation, which will bring us to a page that looks like this. Now, on the left-hand side, you'll notice we have things like accounts, activation code, advanced computer searches. These are all things we're going to call endpoints, right? These are the things, the Jamf Pro things or objects with which we can interact using the Classic API. I'm also going to call your attention up in the top left corner. You'll see /JSS resource, right? JSSR, all caps, eSource being under lowercase. So again, these endpoints, right, are the things with which we can interact using the Classic API. Now, in this first example, we're going to view the device inventory information for a device. And so we're going to come on down to the endpoint called mobile devices. And when you click on and expand this device, you're going to see that we have a list of actions, right? Action, ACT, ION. We want action. So again, you'll see here, for example, that we can get, right, delete, post, and put. Now, we'll come back and talk about some of these identifiers later, but what I want to do is kind of make a connection between these API actions and Jamf Pro user permissions. So on this page, right, we can kind of see what actions, right, correspond to the Jamf Pro privileges we're using. So to perform a get call, right, the account needs to be able to read that object. Delete is delete, right? Post will be to create objects, and put will be to update objects. And a really easy way to differentiate between post and put, right? Put has a U, as does update, put, update. Awesome. Now, we do have in our developer pages, right, an actual documentation of the specific privileges that are required to do different things using the Classic API. So for example, here, we can see that in order to perform a GET, right, API call on the mobile devices endpoint, our user is going to need the privilege to read mobile devices. Now, pro tip, as we are building out accounts to create API calls, we should only give that account the bare minimum privileges needed to accomplish this task. So again, what we're going to do in just a moment is create an account that only has the privilege to read mobile devices. So here we are, right, inside of Jamf Pro. I'm going to build a user called Jamf Admin, and the only box that I'm going to check is read mobile devices. So again, right, bare minimum privileges, the minimum privileges do the task, just read mobile devices. So now that we know a bit about curl, right, we've built our user account, let's actually take a look at what an API call looks like and how we can go ahead and get this device with an ID of 100. So here we are in Code Runner, right? We're doing this in a language called Bash, right? There's our shebang at the top. Now, another really awesome pro tip, make your life a lot easier down the road, is as you are writing commands or scripts, always comment out what you're doing. So you'll see there on line 3, I made a little comment that says we're going to get the inventory information of the device with ID 100. So again, that way, if I come back in a day, a week, a month, a year, I know what I was doing. Now, this is our API call. So again, we're going to go ahead and kind of talk through, we're going to kind of break it down, right? Break it down, the components of this API call, and then actually run it and see what we get. So first of all, right, there's our buddy curl. Again, we're using the full path of this binary, USR bin curl. Awesome. But what you'll notice, though, is after this, there are a bunch of kind of hyphenated letters that come in a random order. Let me jump back to our curl manual page and kind of call out the different options or flags that we can add onto these binaries. So here, for example, you'll see that we can have a -S or a -s. So capital S would show error, right, if the message fails, but we have a -s, which stands for silent, right, or quiet mode. By default, this binary will give you kind of a progress meter. So for example, if we were curling down a file, awesome, we'll see that progress meter. This will happen fairly quickly. We don't need to see that. So again, we have all these different options you can read about in your manual page. So again, we'll see here, the -s is for silent. The -u is for user. Now, these flags can go in almost any order that you want. So again, if you have A preference, awesome, you do you. But if we have a hyphen lowercase u, that must immediately be followed by username, password. So again, we made a user called Jamf admin that only has the privilege to read mobile devices. That user has a password of Jamf1234. So again, hyphen u, space, Jamf admin, Jamf1234. Then we have a hyphen capital H, which is for a header. Now, with the Jamf Pro Classic API, we can either get back JSON or XML. This header is saying, hey, Jamf Pro, I want to accept from you XML. Cool. And at the very end, we also have a hyphen capital X. Now, this is how we're going to define the command we're using. Get is the default action for a curl command. However, as a better practice, dare I say a best practice, we might want to go ahead and throw that on there as well. So again, we're telling this is the action we're performing with this curl command. Now, we have our Jamf Pro URL, right? JNUC API -1a.pro.jamf.training. Then we have our endpoint, right? JSS resource, capital JSSR, eSource, lowercase, mobile devices, ID, and we are doing this for a device which has an ID of, that's right, 100. Now, when we run this command, this is what we'll get, right? Thanks to the magic of editing and making sure this works in production. This worked, and you'll notice we get a big response body of XML. Now, this is all one line, right? Cool. And we can see here, for example, right at the very first line, this device has an ID of 100, a display name of Ada's iPad. We can see things like the asset tag, right? It has an asset tag of JS100144. Cool. If we were to jump into the Jamf Pro GUI, right, the interface, we can see the same thing, right? Here's Ada's iPad. It has an ID of 100. There's our asset tag, the device name. Awesome. Now, what I want to do is kind of show you some other kind of formatting, we'll say tips and tricks for this command as well. So if we jump back right into our command, you can see here, for example, instead of doing this all on one line, we can use a backslash to denote, hey, even though I'm going to have a line break, this is basically should be on the same line. So here, for example, this is in kind of an easier way to format our command if we want to do it line by line, right? So we have curl-s and space backslash, hit return, right? A hard return. There's our user credentials, space backslash, header, URL, endpoint, ID, and our command. And I hear somebody saying, David, it looks like you have a plain text username and password in this command of the script. And yes, that's correct. It's not ideal. It works. What we're going to do next, though, is show you a quick, simple way to kind of obfuscate or hide that using a binary or a command called base64. Now, on your screen is a way to use this binary base64 to obfuscate or hide these credentials. Now, this is not terribly secure. Again, this can be reversed fairly easily, but it is better than showing just username and password. This also harkens back to this idea of only giving this user that we're using to credential through the absolute minimum privileges to accomplish the task. So here, for example, right, we're going to see echo space -n space double quotes user :password, closure quotes, and a space. Then we're going to use a character called pipe, right? That little vertical line over the return key on an American keyboard is called a pipe. Think back to like Super Mario Brothers 3, right? We're going to pipe that, go to a different world. In this case, we're going to take that and pipe it to a binary called base64. On the next line, you see this random string, AMFTZM, and so on and so forth. These are our base64 obfuscated or encoded credentials. So what this looks like now, right, same command, but instead of a -u in user password, we're going to use another header flag, right? So again, -H, authorization basic, and then my credentials. Cool. Now, you might also notice there on line 8 that I've added one more little bit to this command, right? So once we've taken our get, I've used another pipe, and I'm going to send this to a binary called XML-lint, right? And what XML-lint is going to do in this case is format this data, right? XML is just one long line, right? It's really easy for computers to read that. I'm not a computer. What this is going to do is make the output a little more palatable, a little easier for me to read. When we run this command, now we can see, right, we have this kind of hierarchical structure of XML, mobile devices, then we go down a level to general, then we have ID, display name, device name, asset tag, and so on and so forth. Now, once we know how to get device information, for example, then we could go ahead and then modify, right? So for example, if we're changing, maybe we've decided that our company was acquired by a different company, we want to cut the JS off of all of our asset tags. Now we know a way to get, right, a device's inventory information, maybe the asset tag, then we can go ahead and write a script to change that device or other device asset tags. Cool. Pretty straightforward, right? Again, if you want to go back and look at the screenshots, that is a basic curl command to get a device with a specific ID. Awesome. Now that we've got the device, let's talk about how to send a remote command to a device. So if we go back to our /API documentation, we will find an endpoint called mobile device commands, all lowercase, all one word. And if we expand this endpoint, we'll see the first two post boxes, right? The first post box will show us the different commands that we can send to devices using the Jamf Pro Classic API, right? Got a big long list. Right below that, you'll see another post box that shows us, for example, if we're using the device lock, right, there's our mobile commands endpoint, the command, the name of the command itself, maybe some options, right, then a slash and an ID and a list of IDs. So in this case, what we're going to do next is we're going to send a restart device command to Ada's iPad. Now, it's hard to read, but if you look in that list, you'll notice that the restart device command requires that this device be supervised, right? Again, so in order for this to work, we must make sure that this device is in fact supervised, otherwise it won't respect this command. So having said that, let's take a look at this API call and see how we can actually send a restart device command. So here we go. There's our curl, right? -s again for silent. We have our authorization basic, right, for our users username and password. But you'll notice we don't have the response header, right? We're not sending or receiving data. This is just a command. So we don't need a header to specify, for example, XML or JSON. Now you'll notice, right, our endpoint has changed. So in this case, we're going to mobile device commands, right? And the command is restart device. And the device ID that I want to restart is 100. Now you'll also notice that our -X flag has also changed. Previously, we're using a get command. Now we're going to post. And again, you can see here, we need to use the post, right? So we're going to post these commands. Now, when we run this, right? Awesome, ready to go. Let's run it. Oh man, sad trombone noise. It failed. Now, one of the nice things about curl is if you actually read the failure message, sometimes it can kind of point you in the right direction. Again, I mentioned before, learning how to write API calls and scripts is like riding a bike. If you're going to fall off and scrape your knee, that's okay. Persevere. Let's get back up on the bike. But you'll notice at the bottom, it says, hey, this request requires user authentication, which can mean one of two things. It can either mean that you have the wrong username and or password, or it can also mean that the user we're trying to use to do this thing doesn't have the right privileges. And if you think all the way back, like 10 minutes ago, right, we made Jamf admin, but we only gave Jamf admin a singular privilege, right? And that privilege was to read mobile devices. So in this case, what we're going to do is hop back to our privilege chart, our cheat sheet, if you will, and take a look at the privileges needed to do this thing. So in this case, right, in order to send a post command to our mobile device commands endpoint, we need two privileges, right? We need the privilege to create mobile devices, because it's post, right, we're creating, but we also need the privilege to send mobile device command, that specific command, inside of Jamf Pro Server Actions. So if we jump back into Jamf Pro, into our user account, right, let's go back to Jamf admin, the first thing we're going to do is give them the privilege to create mobile devices. So again, we've taken away read. It's kind of hard to see those little boxes. Again, we've took away the read command, now can create mobile devices under Jamf Pro Server objects, and also send mobile device restart command inside of Jamf Pro Server Actions. So again, right, if we get a failed message, awesome, that's okay. Learn from it. But you'll see here that if this command fails, check your privilege, check your username and password, obviously, and then check your privileges, right? Because that way we know that this user has the right privileges to do the thing. So at this point, right, we can jump back in to Code Runner, plug this in one more time. We hit run. What we'll get, if a command executes successfully, is we'll get back the command itself. And you can also see here the ID of the device that has been restarted. Cool. So there we have it. Two really basic API calls: how to get device inventory information, how to restart a device with the Jamf Pro Classic API. Yeah, that's it. So I want to say thank you so much for attending today. If you have any questions, I'll try to be in the chat. You can also reach out. My email address is david.rest@jamf.com. And again, hopefully this, for those of you who are new to the API, new to scripting, this will kind of open your eyes to some of the things that we can do with the API. Again, it's all about automation, right? This is the whole work smarter and not harder. So again, thank you all so much for coming out today, or virtually coming out today for attending. And good luck, and go forth and use the API. Appreciate it.